Hey, Pulse Nation, Richard Garner here, host of a Third Way podcast and regular contributor here at The Pulse on all things media and beyond. Our fearless leader, Joe Martino, finishing up his well-deserved R&R. He will be back next week. But this week, we're going to be talking about something that, unfortunately, we've been talking about for the last 2 years, and that is the term gaslighting. Where does that term come from? What does it mean exactly? And why is it relevant right now? So let's start, first of all, with the term itself. According to our friends at Google, the term is simply manipulate someone by psychological means into questioning their own sanity. So why does that matter? We'll get to that in a second. The origin story of gaslighting is, of course, if you don't know, from the 1944 movie Gaslight. This movie was about a husband manipulating his wife into believing she was crazy. Hence, the term gaslighting is often used around that, around specifically men manipulating women into believing they're crazy in relationships, etc. And it has a place within that context. However, the reason why people's sanity and manipulating somebody into believing they're crazy has been a trope in movies and series for years is because of the terror that we can experience as a viewer when watching it. Because there is something intangible that's infinitely more impactful than you would think about losing your credibility / starting to question your own sanity. And you would argue, well, that's hard to do. There's facts, there's figures, there's ways to know. But then you arrive in the world that we've been in, especially the last couple of years, and you're seeing this. You're seeing that something is 2 + 2 = 4, and somebody's trying to tell you that 2 + 2 = 5. And understandably, that's traumatic. It's actually violent in a way because it really has a negative effect on people, regardless of the fact that the evidence might tell a different story. So if we zoom out to the bigger subject matter of, let's say, alternative perspective, only something that's been happening in the last 200 or 300 years, because prior to that, you had kings and queens. There was no need for gaslighting. They just told you that you were a serf, a peon, or a slave. In the last 300 years or so, we've had to do it differently because we were told we were free and that things were actually democratic. And of course, we know deep down that that's not the case. But the big pillars, if you will, of the conspiracy community were 3 things. And we're going to talk about them today because not only have they come true and are continuously coming true in the form of the new, in this case, the WHO Global Pandemic Treaty, which we'll get to in a sec. But even though the people that have been calling for this for years, that have been saying that very specifically that there would be a push for more globalist power that would supersede sovereign states, that it might come in the form of a major crisis, even a potential pandemic that would allow not only the globalist non-elected entities to take more power to protect us, that in fact we, the people, would be begging for that protection from a quote unquote one world government.
Can you imagine the one world bureaucracy of all these elitists and their private jets that would rule our country and we wouldn't get to vote? So I'm dead set against this. And they used to call people who talked about one world government, they used to say, oh, it's a conspiracy. We would always say, no, it's in their mission statement. They say it at every meeting. That's what they're for.
Well, we arrived today as we sit here right now at the old World Economic Forum, our good friends, the global elitists, the Schwarbers, as some people like to call them, the Schwabers, if you will, are discussing many things about our future. One of those is, of course, a global pandemic treaty. Now, that's in the news everywhere. And of course, we've talked recently about Bill Gates' redemption tour, how to stop the next pandemic tour, how to erase your mind tour, whatever it was. He referenced this need for more international power that can have more clout, more impact, more say on future pandemics and how to coordinate the efforts to prevent pandemics, but also how to coordinate the efforts during a pandemic. So this WHO global pandemic treaty involves literally them being able to go into sovereign countries and enforce lockdowns. Like I don't even know how to overstate how dystopian sci-fi crazy that sounds. But of course, it's being discussed out there not only as just you know regular everyday talk like you're talking about the weather, but in fact, in most cases, it's supported. In most cases, it's viewed as a positive, except, of course, in communities like here at the Pulse. Of course, now the legal, the divide of right and left. Yes, there's people on one side who are going to call this out, who are more prone to be distrustful of government. There's still people on the left that also see some problems with this. But generally speaking, as brought to you by our friends at the Washington Post and Jeff Bezos, this is the headline you should expect to see. Yes, that's right. The global pandemic treaty being held up by conspiracy theorists. No mention of the incredible complexities of bringing in non-elected entities like the WHO, not mentioning at all that, of course, it's acknowledged everywhere that they are disproportionately controlled by China. In fact, at the Global Health Assembly recently, you know who wasn't invited? Everybody was invited except Taiwan, because Taiwan doesn't exist according to the Chinese. And was there pushback from this massive assembly that are really trying to figure out what's best for the world health going forward? No, it was like, okay, well, China doesn't want Taiwan here. Taiwan's not coming. So if that doesn't give you some indication of the, again, disproportionate influence China has over the WHO, obviously how the pandemic was handled, how the investigations into the source of the pandemics coming out of China, we know those stories. And again, you can reference articles and previous videos on that. But we're in the midst of the final stages of the legalities being drawn up right now of some entity out there that will be allowed in future pandemics to be able to call the shots in nation states. Now, will there be pushback? We hope so. But is there anybody apologizing? Is there anybody saying, wow, you know what? I remember people talking about this like 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and now it's coming to fruition. You know what? You guys aren't so crazy after all. No, you're seeing headlines like you're seeing in the Washington Post. Now, what would this global health treaty involve as well? Obviously, the administration of vaccines, and of course, the enforcement of compliance for vaccines.
It is basically biological chip that it is in the tablet. And once you take the tablet and dissolves into your stomach, sends a signal that you took the tablet. So imagine the applications of that, compliance. The insurance companies to know that the medicines that patients should take, they do take them. It is fascinating what happens in this field.
So if you did see this clip recently, you might have been misled to believe that this was recent. It was in fact from 2018. So yes, from our friends at Reuters, fact check video shows Pfizer CEO in 2018 discussing pill with sensor for mental illness, not new Pfizer drug. So you can read the entire article, but if you like me have been somebody who has been checking out the fact checkers over the last 2 years especially, you would see that often these fact checks that are false and ultimately dismissed or marginalized as fake news or misinformation, when you actually read the fact check, often the gist of what it's about is not actually argued. It's, oh, they said it in 2018 and they're saying it's 2022. They're saying that this is a new drug from Pfizer when in fact they were talking about a drug that was approved for another company. Like, are you kidding me? In the end, you have the CEO of a drug company talking to dignitaries, presidents, prime ministers, CEOs, monarchs from around the world about a future where you would administer medication, a pill with a sensor in it that can alert the necessary authorities, your doctor, your insurance company, the government, whomever, that you've taken your medicine. Now, you might say, Richard, okay, this is extreme situations of severe acute mental health issues. So you know what? I can see why that actually could be a good idea. But wait, of course, it doesn't end there. if you were treated to the 60 Minutes segment mid-pandemic by the irascible Bill Whitaker on the DARPA development of a super vaccine. You can now only watch that piece, by the way, on Paramount's new streaming service. Before you were able to watch it on CBS's site, you can't. But here's a headline from Business Insider. So what's strange about this new super vaccine that they're developing? Well, it includes this, a chip that you will have in your body permanently, ish. And this will be able to signal to your body as well as outside that you're sick, and it will release the vaccine into your bloodstream. And this is a super vaccine. So you're good for all flus, all SARS-CoV-2s, and pretty much anything else out there under the sun, which I don't fully understand how that could be, but that's a video for another day. So is this something that is imminent? Well, by the sounds of it, there's going to be people that are going to be in human trials this year on the quote unquote super vaccine. But around the world, you might have heard these chip parties. This is people voluntarily requesting to be chipped for everything from access into their building, so they no longer need a key card, to being able to go into a grocery store and be able to walk out without paying because it comes out of their bank account. But the point is, pillar number 2 of the conspiracy theory foundation was always this idea that we would be chipped, that there was always going to be this move towards chipping us for tracking, etc. And of course, that was laughed at and trivialized and marginalized, never more so than during the pandemic. Is there anybody now apologizing or even making the connection that what was long talked about is now happening? No. People are saying, hey, this is a good thing. Why would you be against this? This is something that's going to help you, fight off future viruses as well. And what's the big deal? It's not like they're actually tracking it. It's just a sensor. It's just a piece of technology in your body. So that's the definition of moving the goalposts. Every time you bring up something, hey, wait a sec, we were talking about this 20. Oh, no, this is different. This isn't that. And even if it is, so what? Why are you so concerned? Again, that's the definition of gaslighting. Somebody at some point is going, seriously, am I being punked here? Like, what is going on? And of course, the granddaddy of them all, not necessarily aligned with what we're talking about, but important nonetheless when talking about the long arc of gaslighting. And of course, that is the world of UFOs. Wait a sec, UFOs don't exist anymore. They've been rebranded. They're now called UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomenon. And of course, they're no longer tinfoil hat things. They're actually now being discussed at hearings. The first hearing actually in 50 years, first public hearing on UFOs/UAPs was last week. And you have military brass, top people around the world discussing the declassified UFO reports, now up to 400 by US military, whether it's Navy, whether it's Air Force, who have spotted, again, all sorts of crazy physics-defying objects throughout the skies for years and decades. So this is the world we live in. You're called a conspiracy theorist. You're gaslit into believing that you might be crazy because everybody else is saying that they don't see that the emperor is wearing no clothes. And you're like, oh, I can see the emperor is naked. So that can be very difficult to deal with. And of course, when these things are proven to be true, are you then redeemed? Is there a lineup of people with mea culpas and apologies that come back to you and say, sorry for sort of ruining your life and mocking you and ridiculing you? As it turns out, what you were talking about turned out to be true. No. You get a new explanation as to why what they were saying before was not exactly what you're saying. And in fact, what you were saying didn't exactly come true. Again, folks, that's gaslighting. Call it the old frog in the boiling water, whatever it is, moving the goalposts. This is a way to be able to, and I say this again, non-judgmentally, with empathy, as much empathy as I can muster. It is a coping mechanism. I get why the unknown is scary. I get why a species that's programmed for survival, for the most part, are prone to dismissing things that keep them up at night, that don't make their lives easier. So nobody wants to believe, really, that there's potentially more advanced civilizations out there that could overpower us. It's why, like, many people wouldn't be able to deal with that. The anxiety would be huge. So yes, you start to ridicule, you start to dismiss, you start to marginalize people. But beyond the understanding that that's a coping mechanism for you, it's also an act of outright hostility and violence to other people. So all I would say to anybody out there, if you were somebody on that side that was dismissing something and that came around to be true later, just have the guts, have the intestinal fortitude, the integrity to acknowledge, you know what, I was wrong, and I was wrong for being so closed-minded, and I've learned from this going forward. I'm actually going to be a little more open-minded when I hear new things that I might not initially believe or align with, but I'm going to listen. I'm going to be more objective. I know, sounds like a fantasy, sounds like heaven perhaps, but I hope that even though many of the people out there are still on board with the collective gaslighting of people who bring inconvenient truths to the table, that there's a few more out there that have maybe had their eyes open and their hearts open and their minds open to being a little more open-minded going forward.